The console versions of this game are different and have already been covered in a separate review which you can find in the information card and description. If the console versions of licensed games are already hardly spoken of and underappreciated, think about how much more the GBA versions of those titles are looked over. Today we'll be looking at Attack of the Twonkies for the Game Boy Advance, released in 2004 and developed by Tantalus Media this time. In addition to working on many a licensed title and various portable ports, the company would also go on to work on Twilight Princess HD, Sonic Mania, and City Skylines. Of course, being adapted from the same material as the console version, the story is very similar. Jimmy on a trip to Twonkies 3 accidentally brings back an alien that Carl names Twonkies, which quickly afterwards turns into a pandemic of monsters ravaging the town, which Jimmy now has to clean up. Of course, for the purposes of the game, the story goes on a ton of detours the TV version doesn't, which, unlike the console version, has a bit more story linking it all together. The highlight being a Gromp breaking into Jimmy's lab and shrinking Jimmy down into a quartet of fully platforming focused levels, finished off with a very difficult level flying a paper airplane to collect those doodads you get. Featuring a very basic 3D model for the airplane. The style was similarly used for two other levels, the Travel to Twonkies 3 and the Bad At a Heck Ride. All story is told through text and much of the time through stills of the show. The dialogue has some good banter between characters, only issue being when a character's face is visible, they attempt to give them mouth movements and it just looks... The gameplay is much like its console counterpart, just with 2D pre-rendered graphics, which look rather good. The game has a much higher reliance on platforming. It tries to keep it fresh, but your mileage may vary. A tad of delay on the jump can cause some difficulties, but the platforming never really gets that hard to begin with. And in the last set of levels, they introduced the jetpack, which completely trivializes any platforming left in the game after that point. In the before-mentioned shrunken lab level, you have to climb down a string to get to the rest of the level. It's barely visible in the corner of the stage, and how are you even supposed to know to climb down it? It wouldn't be an issue if the game had taught the player in the previous stage that the strings look like this, but all the previous strings were white. Inventions overall are very different from the console version. In every level, you're able to complete it without collecting every Neutronium, which is a very helpful health regeneration item, or even capturing every Twonkie. The only thing keeping you from finishing the level is collecting every invention piece. Every invention has 3 pieces related to it, and once you have all 3, you get the invention. Starting with the anti-gravity boots, which gives you a double jump and protects you from fall damage, which I'm not even sure exists, as nowhere in the first level did a fall actually hurt me, and at no point after do you lose this protection, so it really only amounts to slow landings and prolonging the inevitable. But most of the inventions provide practical uses. The game makes very good use of the GBA's ability to scale and rotate sprites by allowing you to aim anywhere in 90 degrees from in front of you to above you. On top of generally more ways of stunning enemies by either jumping on them or sliding into them, you've got the shrink ray, which can leave enemies harmless for a large amount of time, as well as temporarily silence music and other noises that would cause Twonkies to evolve. Invisible hamster launcher that leaves enemies in place but takes a while to shoot. Confusion ray that can't tilt but leaves enemies very quickly stunned. A teleporter that moves Twonkies away from you. There's also one that lets you disguise yourself as any enemy in the game and use their abilities, but it's kinda useless. It is fun to use, however. You can swap through the inventions with the L and R buttons. If pressing both L and R at the same time, you can switch to using Goddard, who has absolutely no use. You can also select inventions in a menu with the select button. This, along with how quickly you can devolve Twonkies and capture them, makes for a very well-paced combat. The elemental Twonkies have a fair bit more to them this time around, with certain ones having abilities others don't. Ice Gromps able to drop ice from above you, dark matter Twonkies that can teleport the player. Every variation also has its own boss variation to coincide with the more regular bosses that are sprinkled throughout the game. The boss battles mostly come down to finding and exploiting a weakness, a bit of a puzzle if you will. The dialogue before the boss drops a hint of varying quality. The first boss has used the slide to cause it to drop rocks on its own head. The game does not tell you outright that the slide exists. The next boss, Butch, has the same idea, but at a distance using the shrink ray. Thunder Twonkie here has you pressing buttons to press another button that sprays water at it. Later on, there's this hamster, which has you lure it into its cage with food and then close it, which will reopen unless it's all the way closed by the time it comes back. In the frozen lab boss, you must use the confuse ray to cause it to charge at the other end of the room towards the heater so it will be dazed, and then you slide into it for damage. And of course, the final boss Twonkie, who's a boss rush who moves Very. Slowly. I mentioned the combat is quickly paced, however the same cannot be said for Jimmy's movement, as walking is slow and running is difficult to initiate. His jump is easy to control in the air, but the delay in the jump can cause issues when landing from a jump and wanting to immediately jump again. I'm no scholar when it comes to music and its composition, but I believe the music complements its stages very well. Icy tones on Twonkies 3. The slow roll of the beginning town stages. The slow, menacing theme used in the lab while shrunken. Generally, as the game progresses, the music becomes more sinister. I have more of my favorites to pad out for time. Do be wary about the constant level of slowdown. The game likes to put a ton of sprites on screen, so the game very often slows down, which can make the game feel somewhat more sluggish than it already does. I've said that you don't have to collect every Twonkie in the game, but at the end of every level it tallies all the collectibles and lives, meaning you can 100% the game. Not only do I not know if you get anything for it, but you also can't replay levels. They implemented a save system, which is nice despite the fact that the game isn't actually much longer than the average NES game, but you can't return the levels to complete them, or even enjoy playing the game again unless you play from the beginning, which is the problem the console version also had. But really, when it comes down to it, I recommend this version over the other, with gameplay that is considerably more interesting than anything the console version does. Ugh. This video marks the 1-year anniversary of when I started using the title Shovelware Extraordinaire. Beginning with the console version of the very game you see here. Would have also been when I hit my 100th sub, but some guy ducked out last second. Not that the number matters much anymore, considering the majority of the channels are probably dead by now. But anyways, if you haven't seen the other reviews, please do, and if you want more, they certainly come out at some point, but I value not forcing myself to create anything, so they spend a long time in limbo. And please leave a comment, I absolutely love those.